First of all, I do want to ask a few questions that were raised by various speakers. And I'm going to start by asking Mr. Whitlock, I think, to, within a few minutes, give a definitive explanation of the difference between housing with support services and a shelter, and what our experience has been in the city in terms of any negative externalities, operational challenges, etc., between those two different things.
Chair, and I'll have to admit that I'm not an expert in respect to the shelters themselves, but they clearly are intended to deal with emergency situations, and particularly the shelters that we saw set up over this past 6 months were intended to deal with, as is indicated, cold and wet conditions where people otherwise would be left out on the street. And I think we've heard some of the attributes. Typically speaking, they may be mats on the floor. The people typically may be asked to leave the shelter early in the morning and not return to the evening, so in no way are they a transitional form of housing or anything intended to be transitional or permanent. Whereas the proposal before you will allot a room to each tenant. There will be a meal program involved, there will be staffing involved, and there will be no sort of coming and going in respect to the occupancy of the units. The resident will be able to occupy the units all day long if they so choose.
My recollection of HEAT was at least that it originally started as a zero barrier shelter. Can you explain the difference between that and what some of the operational requirements would be, or expectations of the tenants would be?
Yes, typically shelters do not set up barriers to residency. Otherwise, the occupants simply would choose not to stay in those kind of establishments. Where this will be more of a landlord-tenant situation, where there will be sort of common courtesies required between tenants and the landlord. If a tenant does abuse the situation, I think these are some of the things which will have to be worked out as part of the operational management plan. Typically what you're looking at is the relationship between the tenant and other tenants in the building, and if a tenant sort of abuses that privilege, they may be asked to relocate or move from the building. And certainly that relates to things like these are not alcohol and drug free. It's not intended that they be abstinence-based models, but again, the behavior of the tenant will be key to continuing living in the premise.
HEAT also didn't have operations management plans. What's been our experience so far? I know on the 12 social housing sites we established many of them, and many of those aren't physically there yet. But what's been our experience with operational management plans in the past for social housing?
Well, certainly, yes, the experience that we've had on two major projects that were controversial in the city are the Youth Services Center on Burrard and 39th and Fraser Street, where we have 30 residences who have mental illnesses, and the operational management plan and the operations of the project themselves have little or no impact on the surrounding neighborhood.
Several speakers raised questions of feelings of personal safety, worried about their safety, and asked us to ask questions about security. How much is that usually a component of the operations management plan? Would the service provider like to give any clarification on security issues or approaches?
I can certainly offer a preliminary comment. Where you have a building which has a lobby and an entranceway, the management of the building can oversee who's coming and going. And so the issue to do with drug dealers and prostitution and those kind of activities can be monitored through secure entranceways into the building. And that's clearly a difference from the shelters where, in fact, there's none of those kind of security considerations are in place. So, Liz, did you want to?
Our staff will perform the security function at all times, and they will monitor who's coming in and out of the building at all times, and we historically keep very tight control over who is allowed into the building. So if there's disruptions with people who know people, like we would actually call the police and have those people charged. drug dealing going on inside of the buildings. And we have a long, long track record of making many calls about these sorts of activities. We have lots and lots of policies and procedures that haven't been written up yet because the project is not until May. And I think that when we're referring to the management plan, it'll have lots of details in it around specifically what sorts of behaviors will result in what sorts of actions being taken. But it's very different from a shelter. It's a housing program with support.
Ms. Evans, I know this often gets established in the operations management plan, but what's been either our practice, Mr. Whitlock, or your practice through Portland about how far afield your operational responsibilities go? Does it end at your door? Do you manage the area outside, immediately adjacent on the sidewalk? How far afield do you keep an eye on things? How far afield would you call the police if you observe something? That sort of thing.
Generally, Ms. Evans, sorry, the mic to your left is on.
Okay. Generally, our sort of sense of our responsibility when we manage a building is we certainly take responsibility for the sidewalk in front. Our staff clean and hose and kind of are the eyes and the ears on the street in front of us. And in our preliminary meetings with the neighboring strata councils, we spoke to the property managers and the security staff in the buildings across the street and on either side, and explained to them that we were more than willing to work with their security staff to provide additional monitoring of their building entrances if they needed that at certain times during the day, because the building right next door, for instance, doesn't have any security for relatively long periods in the night, and where we offer to sort of be in constant contact. So in this specific instance, we would definitely extend beyond the sidewalk what we saw as our sort of community responsibilities in supporting people's sense of security.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Mr. Whitlock, or to the applicant, there was a question about the relocation plan after 3 years. Can anyone provide any additional thoughts at this point?